Smile? Aubrey snapped a photo while I stood half-zipped in a dress that didn't fit. "This'll be great for your before picture," she laughed. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the bride. I was the project. "Hi, I'm Jenna." I was engaged to a man whose family treated my body like a problem to fix, not a person to love. Every comment, every fitting, every silent nod from him chipped away at who I was. Until one day I folded the dress, closed the ring box, and walked away from the wedding they planned without me in mind. Have you ever been in a relationship where you had to change just to be accepted? Tell me in the comments, what was the moment that made you say, "Enough"? I wasn't even looking at the mirror when Sandra brought it up. I had my hair half-tied, a bobby pin between my lips, and she stood behind me like a wedding stylist I hadn't hired. "That top is bold," she said, her voice coated in a kind of sugar that never quite dissolved. "Might draw too much attention in the photos." It was a soft blue blouse, cotton, the kind you could wear to brunch or church and no one would look twice. But there it was, the first little flick of the measuring tape. Not physical yet, but it would come. That Sunday lunch at the Caldwell's house had the usual menu: grilled salmon, potato salad, and an air of polite evaluation. I'd learned early on that everything in that house had its place: cutlery, cushions, opinions. Sandra always greeted me with a kiss that landed somewhere near my cheek and a compliment that never quite arrived. "You always look so comfortable," she said once. It took me a whole ride home to realize that wasn't really a compliment. Ethan, my fiancé, had tried to prep me before we got there. "My mom just wants everything perfect," he said, handing me the wine I'd chosen for them. "You know how she is with weddings. Obsessed since before Aubrey even had a boyfriend." I had smiled and nodded. It was easier that way. Ethan had a kind heart, but when it came to his mother, that heart turned into a sponge, soaking up whatever tension floated around, never pushing back. Their house sat in a quiet cul-de-sac, 2-story brick, all symmetry and soft lighting. Inside smelled like lemon cleaner and eucalyptus, and Sandra always had fresh garden roses arranged in little crystal vases on every table. It wasn't a home exactly. It was a showroom that occasionally let people eat in it. Richard Caldwell, Ethan's dad, greeted me with a handshake that lasted too long. He smiled but didn't say much. He never really did unless Sandra gave the cue. I used to think he was quiet out of kindness. Now I think he just practiced silence like a hobby. Lunch moved along in careful beats. Sandra asked about our apartment. Ethan spoke. I added a sentence. She offered her opinions on rental neighborhoods as though we were still shopping. Midway through the meal, she shifted the subject effortlessly. "I've been thinking about dresses," she said, folding her napkins so neatly it looked ironed. "There's a boutique in Durham that's just lovely. They carry gowns for all kinds of brides. Really inclusive sizing." I swallowed a sip of sparkling water. Ethan nodded vaguely. I changed the topic. After dessert, lemon tarts arranged like little yellow suns, Sandra walked me to the foyer. "I pulled a few magazines for inspiration," she said, placing a small stack into my hands. One had a sticky note, P. 43. Neckline for rounder shoulders? I blinked at the smile she gave me. On the drive home, Ethan played soft jazz on the car speakers and tapped his thumb on the steering wheel like nothing had happened. "She's just trying to help," he said when I asked if that had felt weird to him. "That's her love language. Projects." I looked out the window at the rows of dogwood trees lining the road, their blossoms just starting to bloom. I didn't say anything. I'd spent most of my life being polite. It was a reflex, like breathing. But in that moment, I started to wonder if silence was my own kind of betrayal. That night, after we brushed our teeth and got under the covers, my phone buzzed, a text from Sandra. "Let's schedule a dress fitting soon. I know some tailors who specialize in curve-friendly gowns." Curve-friendly. Not flattering, not elegant, but curve-friendly. like my body was a hiking trail someone needed tips to survive. Ethan was already asleep, breathing soft and even beside me. I sat at the edge of the bed, the bridal magazine in my lap, my fingers grazing the edge of a glossy page with a woman in a beaded halter dress I would never wear. When had I stopped being Jenna, his fiancé, the woman he loved, and become a makeover challenge, a Pinterest board? I didn't have the answer, but I knew something had shifted. Something quiet, something small, like a pin pulled loose from a blouse you thought was holding. I stood in front of the mirror, breathing shallow behind a curtain that didn't quite close. My arms were tucked in, tight to my sides, the way you instinctively shrink when you're trying not to be seen. The Spanx were pinching at my ribs, and I could feel a bead of sweat trickle down my back, not from heat, but from humiliation. I hadn't asked for shapewear. It had been laid neatly on the velvet ottoman when I entered the dressing room, folded like a gift. A shop assistant in head-to-toe black had gestured toward it without making eye contact. "Sandra said it helps with fit," she offered, then slipped out as though she had just handed me something sacred. When I arrived that morning, I'd thought it was going to be a quiet one-on-one fitting. Sandra had texted, "We'll pop in. Try a few styles. Just us girls." But when I walked into the boutique, she was already inside with two of her friends, both dressed like they were headed to a charity brunch, and Aubrey, Ethan's younger sister, perched on a love seat like she was waiting for her moment on a reality show. "Oh, good, you're here," Sandra called, waving. "We didn't want to start without the bride." The boutique was stunning. White marble floors, tall mirrors, lighting that could forgive almost anything. I used to think places like this were designed to make women feel beautiful. Now I realized they were curated more like stages. The lights weren't soft, they were focused, and the audience had already taken their seats. Aubrey bounced up to greet me, all teeth and perfume. "You're gonna love what Mom pulled," she said. "She's been on a mission." A mission. That was one word for it. The first dress was lace-heavy, with delicate straps and a plunging neckline. I stepped out hesitantly, hands smoothing over the fabric. Sandra tilted her head. She said, "that neckline isn't forgiving." Maybe something with a bit more structure? One of her friends nodded in agreement. Not everyone suits spaghetti straps. I smiled politely and turned back to the dressing room. The second dress wouldn't zip. The third clung in all the wrong places. The fourth made me look like a lampshade. Sandra sighed more than she spoke. "Some designers just don't understand how to cut for real bodies," she said, as though the fabric was the problem. "This one's supposed to work wonders for fuller figures." Aubrey kept snapping photos on her phone. "Just for reference," she chirped. "You'll want to see what works." At one point, as the assistant tried to wrestle the zipper on a satin sheath, I caught my reflection, arms pressed against my sides, chin tilted awkwardly, and felt the familiar ache in my stomach. Not from hunger, but from memory. From every dressing room I'd ever stood in where the lighting was too harsh and the mirrors too honest. In the fifth dress, a consultant circled me slowly. "Your natural waist could be emphasized with a belt," she said. "Assuming we find it again," Sandra added, not looking up from her phone. No one laughed, but no one needed to. The silence was agreement enough. I stayed quiet. I always did. But something inside me was beginning to shift, not explode, not yet, but bend, like a branch just heavy enough to crack. Then came the moment I wouldn't forget. Aubrey held up her phone. "Smile," she said, snapping a photo while I stood stiff in a half-zipped dress. "This'll be great for your before picture," she joked. The others chuckled. Sandra didn't stop her. No one said a word in my defense. I nodded. I smiled faintly. And then I excused myself to the restroom, where I locked the door and stared at my face in the mirror. It was red, not from shame, but from trying to hold back something that had nowhere to go. Not anger. Not yet. Just this quiet, raw disbelief. How had I gotten here? When I returned, Sandra was paying at the counter for a veil she said might work later, The group had already moved on to lunch plans. "You'll meet us, right?" she asked. "It's just salad and mimosas." I told them I had work emails to catch up on. It was a lie. What I needed was space, air that didn't smell like peonies and criticism. That night, at home, I tossed the shopping bag onto the floor. Ethan was out. The apartment was still. I opened my laptop, intending to check emails. One new message sat bold and unread at the top of the inbox. Subject: "Welcome to your first session with Tara Green, certified personal trainer." The body read: "We're so excited to help you look and feel your best for the big day. Your first consultation is scheduled for next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Bring athletic wear and a positive attitude." I hadn't signed up. No call, no conversation, no choice. Just a neatly packaged solution to a problem I hadn't identified, at least not out loud. I sat back in my chair, the room suddenly smaller. Across the floor, the shopping bag from the boutique had tipped over, its tissue paper splayed like a white flag I hadn't agreed to wave. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard Sandra's voice again. "This designer does wonders for fuller figures." And I wondered, not for the first time, if I was ever going to be enough for them just as I was. I walked into the gym expecting the worst. Harsh lights, judging eyes, maybe even a clipboard and a trainer who spoke in percentages and before and after stories. I'd rehearsed polite excuses in my head, just in case I needed to get out quickly. Instead, I got Tara, blunt, sweaty, and grinning like she'd been waiting all morning for me to show up. "Jenna Morales," she called from behind the front desk. I nodded. "Right on time. You're mine for the next hour." She led me past rows of treadmills and into a quieter section of the gym. Rubber mats, resistance bands, a few squat racks. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and determination. "Don't worry," she said, tossing me a towel. "I'm not going to kill you today." I smiled, even though my stomach was tight. There was a flash of a voice in my head. Coach Mallory from 10th grade PE class, standing in front of the softball diamond with her hands on her hips. "You're not built for sports, sweetie. Maybe try choir." That voice had lived rent-free in the back of my brain for over a decade. It surfaced every time I jogged, bent over, or tried on jeans labeled active fit. Tara didn't ask about the wedding. She didn't ask why I was here. She didn't ask if I had goals. She just handed me a resistance band and said, "Let's see what your shoulders say about you." It was harder than I thought it would be. My muscles ached within the first 10 minutes. I lost count of reps halfway through the warm-up. Sweat collected at the small of my back and under my arms. I was embarrassingly winded after a single round of jumping jacks. "I feel like a potato," I muttered, hands on my knees, trying not to wheeze. Tara handed me a cold water bottle without a word. Then she crouched beside me, elbows on her knees. "You don't owe that wedding your body," she said, casual as weather talk. "Not your future in-laws, not your fiancé. You're here for you. Or you should be." I blinked at her. "You don't even know me." She shrugged. "Don't need to. You showed up. That's enough to tell me you're worth the effort." That was the thing about Tara. She didn't sugarcoat. She didn't say things to make you feel better. But when she spoke, it landed. I went back the next week, and the one after that. At first, it was just about proving them wrong. Sandra, Aubrey, the boutique assistant who didn't look me in the eye, every drop of sweat felt like resistance, like I was peeling away the expectations stitched onto me. But somewhere between the third and fourth week, something shifted. I started listening to music I liked while warming up, not just Ethan's curated wedding playlists. I began planning my meals not for weight loss, but for energy. I stopped hiding in oversized cardigans and wore my old college t-shirt with sleeves rolled up. It wasn't a glow-up. It was a slow turning inward, like I was tuning into a frequency I hadn't known was mine. Tara noticed, of course. "You're showing up different," she said one morning while I stretched my hamstrings. "Is that a good thing?" She grinned. "You're asking the wrong question. Try, is it honest?" By mid-July, I had started keeping a small journal, not for calories, for feelings. I wrote about the sessions, about how sore my thighs felt, but how strong my legs were getting. I wrote about the way Tara never corrected my posture by touching me, just showed me the move herself and let me mirror it. I wrote about how quiet the gym was early in the morning and how nice it felt to do something before anyone else asked anything of me. Then came the weigh-in. I wasn't expecting much. Numbers hadn't been my friends in a long time. Not on scales, not on price tags, not in group chats where sizes were shared like badges. But when Tara adjusted the dial and told me I dropped 5 pounds, I didn't feel elated. I felt calm, like I had earned it, but I wasn't defined by it. She didn't say, "Congrats." She didn't say, "Finally." She reached into her gym bag, pulled out a small box, and handed it to me. Inside was a simple silicone bracelet, slate gray with bold white letters, "Fearless." "What's this?" I asked, half laughing. "Something you've been for weeks now," she said. I put it on without hesitation. That night, I showered at home with the bracelet still on. I sat on the couch in my robe, sipping chamomile tea and flipping through the bridal magazine Sandra had given me. It felt like it belonged to someone else. There was a time not long ago when I would have skipped a session if I hadn't slept well, if my stomach felt bloated, or if I feared I'd be the heaviest one in the room. But now I went anyway. I sweated anyway. I stayed anyway. And I started to realize I hadn't come to disappear. I was starting to show up for me. I wore the dress she once said I couldn't pull off, a sleek, fitted navy piece that hugged me in places I used to avoid seeing in the mirror. It wasn't revealing. It was respectful, but it was bold, at least by Sandra's standards, and that was the point. The fabric moved with me as I walked through the side gate of the Caldwell's home, past the manicured hedges and the gardenia bushes Ethan's mom had probably instructed someone else to trim. The backyard was exactly as I remembered, perfectly staged for the occasion. White linen tablecloths fluttered gently under clipped silver weights. Champagne flutes caught the sunlight. There were garden roses in pale pinks and yellows at every table, placed as if a magazine editor had arranged the scene. I felt all of them look up at once, like synchronized swimmers surfacing for breath. There was a beat of silence. Then Sandra stood, smoothing the front of her pastel green sundress, and walked toward me. "You didn't tell me you had that figure," she said, her hand grazing my arm lightly. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look surprising." "Thank you," I replied. "I feel good." Ethan came up behind me, his arm slipping around my waist a second too late. "Hey," he said softly, "you look great." His voice was warm, but his hand lingered like he was unsure whether to be proud or concerned. We made our way to the table, where a few extended family members I barely remembered greeted me with polite nods. Someone offered me a mimosa. I declined. The glass still found its way to my place setting. The conversation floated above the food like confetti, light, aimless, disposable. Sandra pointed out the new cushions on the patio chairs. Richard made a vague comment about retirement. Aubrey arrived late, wearing white. Of course she did. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she saw me. "Jenna," she said, stretching my name into a smile. "Wow, you've changed." "I have," I said simply. She sat opposite me and immediately pulled her phone out. "You're gonna steal the spotlight at this wedding, huh?" she joked, not quite joking. Who knew blondes really do have more fun? "I'm not here for the spotlight," I said, taking a sip of water. "I'm just here for lunch." The food was beautiful, naturally. Caprese skewers, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables arranged in tight little spirals. I tried to eat, but the air felt tight in my chest, like I needed to stay upright or the whole table might tilt. As the meal wore on, the compliments began to curdle. Sandra leaned toward me between bites of asparagus. "So, are you keeping this look for the wedding? Or maybe tone it down a little? Brides usually want to stand out, not be matched." I looked at her, then at Aubrey, then back. I hadn't planned on matching anyone, just being myself. Aubrey chuckled under her breath. It's just, don't overdo it, you know? The new look, the hair. It's a lot. Richard said nothing, eyes fixed on his plate. Ethan shifted beside me, cutting his salmon into perfect squares. Sandra smiled that polite, tight smile she'd perfected over the years. You look even better than Aubrey today. Just don't steal too much attention next week. It hung in the air like a dropped napkin no one wanted to pick up. I put my fork down gently. Maybe, I said, my voice even, you should stop treating me like a centerpiece and start seeing me as a person. The table went still. The breeze even seemed to pause, as if to listen in. Sandra blinked. Aubrey looked down at her phone. Someone across the table cleared their throat. I reached for my glass, calm despite the roar I could feel behind my ribs. Tara's words floated up in my mind again. Progress is only scary to those who depended on your silence. And in that moment, I knew. They were scared. Not of me, but of losing control of the version of me they had carefully curated for so long. I turned to Ethan. He was still focused on his plate, fork in hand, cutting the same corner of salmon over and over like it might yield a different answer. I waited. Nothing. He just kept cutting his steak. The wedding dress was still hanging on the closet door, the same place it had been for weeks, white, untouched, suspended like a ghost of someone else's dream. I didn't cry when I took it down. The morning light poured in through the sheer curtains of our apartment, the kind of light that made things look softer than they really were. The kitchen was quiet. The hallway was still. Even the usual hum of city life felt muted, like it knew what was about to happen and decided to step back. I sat on the edge of the bed with the dress in my lap, fingers resting on the delicate embroidery. It was beautiful, tastefully classic. Sandra had helped pick it out, of course. She said it would photograph well. At the time, I nodded, said thank you, and convinced myself I liked it. Now I could barely recognize the woman who'd agreed to it. I heard Ethan before I saw him, mugs clinking, the hiss of the kettle. Then his voice, tentative. Coffee? He walked in holding 2 cups, his hair messy from sleep. He looked like Sunday mornings and soft apologies. I took the mug he offered, but didn't drink. He sat beside me just far enough that we weren't touching. I didn't sleep much, he said. Yesterday was a lot. I nodded. It was a lot. It had been a lot for a long time. He looked at the dress, then at me. You're not seriously thinking about canceling everything, right? I let out a slow breath. Ethan, I said, steady, what exactly do you think happened yesterday? He blinked. They were a little much, I admit. But come on, my mom says stuff. She's just like that. You know she doesn't mean anything by it. My jaw tightened. She means it, Ethan. Every time, every comment, every note in a magazine, every appointment I didn't schedule. She meant it, and you let it happen. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, it's just who she is. You're overthinking it. No, I said, firmer now. I've been underthinking it for months. I told myself it was about the dress or the Spanx or Aubrey's jokes, but it's not. It's how invisible I've felt, around her, around you, like I'm some placeholder in a picture she's already arranged. He frowned. So you're really skipping our wedding over feelings? I turned to him, meeting his eyes. I'm skipping it over facts. He didn't say anything. I stood, still holding the dress, and walked to the closet. The hanger creaked slightly as I set it back on the rod. Then I pulled out a simple tote bag from the bottom drawer, folded the dress slowly, carefully, not with hate, just with finality. I needed you, I said, to be my safe place, my buffer when your mother treated me like I wasn't good enough. I needed you to see me. I do see you, he said quietly. I shook my head. You see a version of me that fits into their life, their photos. Their brunch table, I reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out the ring box, held it out to him. You were supposed to be my home, I said, but you let them treat me like furniture. His lips parted, but no words came out. I set the box in his palm and closed his fingers around it. Then I zipped up the tote, slung it over my shoulder, and walked toward the door. "You're really doing this?" he asked. I paused, hand on the doorknob. "You kept cutting your steak, Ethan. That's all I needed to know." Outside, the air was warm and buzzing with early summer sounds. Birds, distant lawnmowers, the hum of a world that didn't care about wedding cancellations. I drove to the nearest consignment shop and dropped off the dress. The woman behind the counter gave me a small form to fill out. "Reason for donation?" she asked, scanning the gown. I hesitated, pen in hand. Then I wrote, "Didn't fit the life anymore," and walked out into the sun. The first night at the resort, I ordered dessert first. A warm pear tart with rosemary ice cream and honey drizzle. No one raised an eyebrow. No one asked, "Are you sure?" I didn't have to explain or earn it. I chose it because I could. The woman at check-in smiled when I handed over my ID. "Ms. Morales, welcome to Blue Ridge Spa Retreat," she said, handing me a cool glass of cucumber water. "We don't allow phones in the spa wings. You can leave it here with us if you'd like." I didn't hesitate. I handed it over, powered off. No more wedding group chat. No more texts from Sandra. No more emails with subject lines like "final RSVP count" or "bridal party timeline." Just silence. The room was simple. Linen sheets, a soaking tub, a tiny balcony with a view of blue-green ridgelines that stretched like folded fabric into the sky. There was a small handwritten note on the nightstand that read, "Welcome to your weekend of rest. We're glad you're here." It had been a long time since I'd felt glad to be anywhere. The next morning, I took a slow walk on a forest trail behind the spa. It smelled like pine needles and wet stone. At one point, I sat on a bench made from reclaimed wood and just listened to bird song, to my own breath, to the absence of expectation. That afternoon, I booked a deep tissue massage with a woman named Elaine, who said very little, but had hands like quiet thunder. When she pressed her palm between my shoulders, a knot I didn't even know I carried gave way, and I exhaled so deeply I startled myself. Over the next 2 days, I let go in increments. I stopped sucking in my stomach during yoga. I stopped rehearsing responses to imaginary conversations. I stopped trying to prove I was okay. Instead, I was just here. One morning after breakfast, I sat in the library lounge, a sunlit corner with armchairs and herbal tea on tap. There was a small writing desk and a stack of stationery. On impulse, I pulled out a sheet of cream paper and began writing. "Dear future me, I hope you never again let someone else narrate your worth." I wrote for nearly an hour. The words poured out like water through fingers, messy, unfiltered, sincere. I folded the letter, sealed it, and tucked it into my journal. Maybe I'd open it next year. Maybe I wouldn't. It didn't matter. Later that day, one of the receptionists stopped me in the hallway. "You have a delivery," she said, smiling, "left by a friend." Inside the small box was a silicone bracelet, black, smooth, engraved with one word in silver, "Unapologetic." There was no card. I didn't need one. I knew it was from Tara. I slipped it on next to the fearless one she'd given me months ago. They clinked softly together like they understood each other. That evening, I hiked up a short overlook trail at the edge of the resort property. The path wound through dogwoods and rhododendrons, up to a rocky ledge with a panoramic view of the mountains. I stood there as the sun began to dip behind the ridges, the sky turning soft shades of coral and violet. The air was cool against my skin. My shoulders relaxed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the wedding, or Sandra's voice, or Ethan's silence. I wasn't rehashing what was said or wasn't said. I wasn't measuring myself against anyone's expectations. I was just breathing. There's a peace that comes, not when things are perfect, but when they're finally quiet. And up there on that ridge, I finally let myself be quiet. I touched the 2 bracelets on my wrist and whispered, to no one in particular, I wasn't too much. They were just too small. Then I smiled, not the forced, "I'm fine" smile I used to wear like armor, a real one. The kind that starts in the chest and climbs up on its own, like light through a window. Sometimes healing doesn't come with grand gestures or perfect closure. It comes with quiet choices, like ordering dessert first or turning off your phone without guilt. Standing on that mountain, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. We spend so much of our lives trying to fit into expectations that were never made for us, but peace comes when we start choosing what fits us, from the inside out. Love shouldn't require shrinking, and family should never be a contest of endurance. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know. What's something you've done just for you lately? Share it or simply carry it quietly. Sometimes that's enough.